All right, so we're on to Tiger Recode here, lesson number 4. And I'll just start by saying a lot of these educational overviews are going to start to be quicker because I covered a lot of this information towards the beginning. I don't want to be too repetitive throughout the course. I also just want to keep these videos short and effective. So the Recode has a lot to do with the nature's design component to this system. As you can see here, the golden ratio, nature's mathematics, which pops up in everything we do. We see it in the way that we travel forward. We see it in the way many animals travel forward. We see it in the way a blade of grass grows. It is everywhere. It's one of the geometric patterns that nature or the creator has utilized throughout all of life. The Tiger Recode is Jim's way, my way, of applying the GOTA system, greatest of all time actions or greatest of all time athletes. So that's what the GOTA acronym stands for. They're on a mission to save the world's connective tissue. The system is focused on restoring our innate physiological design through natural movement. And the way Coach Gilly really started to figure this all out was observation and observing nature, which is probably the thing I like most about GOTA, is that they didn't come up with it themselves. It's not man ignorantly thinking that he's smarter than nature. It's not man thinking that he knows everything or has everything perfectly organized. What the GOTA system has done is observed and seen these consistent patterns and then pursued more depth of knowledge and understanding of what those patterns are, where they show up. And they started to really do that through slow motion video, where they realized there's an optimal geometric way for people to move through time and space. And most people in our society have lost this ability due to the way that we live. Overstimulation, rigid resting positions, and primarily shoes, which is, we've talked about a bunch of times, destroys our posture upstream. So who did GOTA observe moving this optimal way? Well, it started with the best athletes of all time. Gilly started to notice that Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, Ed Reed, a lot of these really high-level athletes were moving in this fluid, effortless, really safe sort of way. And along with that, these seem to be the most durable athletes. So they're performing really well. They're extremely durable, and they seem to be moving a little differently or more efficiently than everyone else. So he pursued that understanding. They saw a common theme in the highest performing and most durable athletes. Then they started to analyze athletes that have survived in their sports the longest. And so they got the best athletes of all time, and now they realized that the ones that lasted and the longest careers, even into 80-year-old marathon runners, moved this way. They also noticed that the people that didn't move this way and moved with worse patterns wouldn't make it that far. So when you studied 60, 70, 80-year-old runners, typically they were mostly GOTAs that made it that way. And most of the other people fell off from injuries, tightness, just inabilities because of their movement patterns. They took it a step further, and they went to nature to study indigenous tribes and observe indigenous tribes in the way that they move. And that's where they really started to say, wow, there is something to this natural movement. People that are more connected to the earth, spend more time on the earth, don't wear shoes, and don't have rigid chairs where they rest, but they're kind of moving around. They're resting in natural positions, deep squats, and getting a lot of forward locomotion. They seem to consistently have healthier physiology and more abilities. Their feet were more active. Their center of gravity was further back. And on top of that, they were just not in pain the way a lot of people in our sedentary lifestyle are in pain. And so they saw it from a little bit more of a creature standpoint, a human in nature. Then it started to really make sense when they observed that these patterns were also frequently displayed by babies and adolescents, children. Children move well, they move fluid, they're durable, they can sit and rest in natural ways, they can bend their bodies, they're not tight, restricted, they're not in pain out of nowhere. They're much more supple, and you kind of see it with that baby posture, which we'll get to more. And it was in the last picture where the baby's kind of seated with little arches in the feet and the hips kind of settle behind the ribs. So we were born with this innate physiological design. It's encoded in our DNA. And after tying all this information together and all these different groups that they've observed, they finally figured out what the design was and realized that all of nature utilizes this pattern. It's referred to as the golden ratio, nature's 22.5-degree geometric spiral. The natural world does not move in a linear fashion. It all moves in spirals, and we are part of that natural world. From a blade of grass to a baby crawling to a tiger running, nature utilizes the golden ratio to grow and move forward through time and space. A healthy human is able to align with this design, which we've talked about towards the beginning, but being able to transfer the energy from one column to the other in forward locomotion is that Fibonacci sequence in that golden ratio. So a healthy human is able to align with this design, exhibit these patterns, and move forward through time and space efficiently without pain and risk of injury, which is what Gilly originally saw in the best athletes of all time. This is only possible if the body has proper access and good posture. When proper access and good posture propels forward, it will find the golden ratio. And that's why we try to make this pattern show up through our processes rather than forcing this pattern. You never want to try to make this pattern happen and try to move a certain way and force this. You want this to show up as a result of a healthy physiological network, right? So a calm mind, free fascia, activation, and alignment through the muscle and skeletal. When we create that, typically these patterns will show up and we will be able to transfer energy more efficiently. And the way you move and rest dictates the way that you feel and function. So the question is, how do we get these movements to become subconscious? And like I said, that's through our processes. So in lesson 2, we calm the mind with the breathing. Lesson 3, we free the fascia. Here in lesson 4, we're really focused on that activation and alignment of the muscle and skeletal. So the main principles of Goda are built around something called the 6 global laws. And these are the six common themes that they see pop up when observing all of these groups of people. First one is go to feet, then it's columns, landing, leaving, back chain dominance, and head control. Go to feet. And so typically we've talked about at the beginning here, a lot of people get their, in our society, due to shoes, we typically don't have a ton of activity in our feet. And so the feet tend to go flat and people's inside ankle bones crash down, ultimately losing the arch of the foot. And in order to reestablish that, we need to reactivate more of the outer edges of the foot and treat the feet more like a hand, where it's kind of gripping the ground as opposed to just flattening into the ground. So arches are not supposed to collapse. They're meant to be active. And when we have all of our weight just on the big toe and the inside edge of the foot, we get excessive pronation, which will shift our center of gravity and create a bunch of postural issues upstream. You see here with the picture on the right side, with the indigenous feet there, their toe box is a little bit wider, their big toe is in a little bit more, and then you can almost see those arches where the feet are almost acting more like hands and they're kind of gripping into the ground. That platform is going to allow them to set their center of gravity a little bit further back. It's also going to allow the talus, the bone that enters into the ankle, to spin a little bit more and rotate to absorb impact. Next is columns, and you can see here with Simone Biles. You want to see a perfect mover? Look at Simone Biles. She's standing really tight and narrow, so that is our columns, right in between the ears and the eyes, which is actually where we land during forward locomotion. You don't want to land too wide, and we'll go over this more on the rerun next lesson, but as you start running, your stance is a little bit wide, but as you get up to your top sprint, you want to be up and narrow, and you want to land in your columns efficiently and organized. And athletes that can run for a long time, or people that can run into late ages, typically do that. And so the columns is where we stand with good standing posture. It's a good resting position. It's not necessarily a strong active position, right? If I'm in a base, and I'm going to base out, which we'll get to in lesson 6, then I don't want to be too narrow. I need more balance and I need more leverage. Typically just standing posture in forward locomotion, we're going to spend most of our time inside these columns, transferring the energy from column to column. And you can see over here, I think it's Greg Oden and Zion. They're just standing wide and they have that weight to the inside of the feet. The feet are flat, and that's going to send their center of gravity forward. You kind of see the sloppiness that leads to a ton of injuries and dysfunction, as opposed to the picture below that with Goda Joe and the indigenous human, which are staring pretty narrow in those columns, arches in the foot, and you can see the inside ankle bone is high. As you can see with Zion and Greg Oden, when they crash the inside of the foot, that inside ankle bone drops low. So one's got that active foot and ankle complex that's kind of a platform, and one's just got the flat feet that's causing all those postural issues upstream. And that's inside ankle bone high versus inside ankle bone low. It takes Goda feet, and the columns will help as well. Next is back chain dominance. You can see here throughout, from the picture of the baby, from the picture of this athlete here, and all these pictures up top, there's a little natural curvature of the spine where the hips kind of rest behind the ribs. And a really healthy human and a healthy athlete is going to have muscle on the posterior there. They're going to have a bigger butt. So you don't want that flat lumbar spine that you see in our society because of lifting, because of sitting, where the hips kind of tuck under a little too much and people kind of lose the glutes. So you want that little curvature where the butt sticks back a tiny bit and settles behind the ribs. And then when you get in an athletic position, or you're going to run, or you're going to get more locomotive, you're going to kind of exaggerate that. The hips are going to be back even forward, and you're going to get a little more leverage. And you can see even with Usain Bolt down at the bottom, when he's at his top sprint, his hips are still behind his ribs a bit. And he's still got a slight anterior tilt. Now, this is also where people can go wrong, where they get excessive on their anterior tilt and excessive on their curvature, which is going to lead to lordosis and kyphosis, two of the things we talked about in the overview, right? So hips slightly behind the ribs and finding that center of gravity where you're a little bit back. All starts with the platform at the feet. Creating the energy wave. So as we shift energy from column to column, we land and the knee opens out and the shoulder packs on that side. So the energy falls into that column and absorbs out, it catches out and then releases back the other way. When you land with a flat foot and that knee doesn't trace this pattern, you're at much higher risk of injury and you're much more abusive on your joints. The impact into the ground over time continuously beats up your joints, it beats up your connective tissues, and it causes you to be tight, right? So the body's not functioning in this way where it's catching the energy, absorbing it, and releasing it in a light and kind of uplifting fashion, as opposed to being more destructive and heavy into the ground. So you can see that knee opens out, creating the energy wave. That's called the bow, 22.5 degrees out. And we'll go over it more next lesson, but then it rides down and out and continues that momentum and releases back up and in into a corner. So that's where the heels away all day goes. And you can see it right here with a couple of these arrows. Jordan's arrow here. This heel starts to go away because this femur starts to turn in after the bow is driven and releases. So the bow catches slightly out, drives down and out, and then as it releases, it comes back up and in. So it catches that energy and drives down and out, and then as it comes up and forward and releases, the energy goes back over towards that other column, and the heel goes away on the side that was the bow, and the femur rotates in. So everything goes from 22.5 degrees out a slight bit to in a slight bit, and that's the rotational Fibonacci sequence that we see in a healthy forward locomotive pattern. All it is the ability to manage forces properly. And a lot of people lack this internal rotation of the femur because they sit so much, they lift so much. The way that they stand, their femurs are kind of stuck externally rotated. They lose the ability to corner. And when they can't corner on the lower half, they typically can't send the energy to the other column and become more rigid and tight when they run, which is going to create more compensations and more physical abuse on the body. Which is going to create more compensations, more restrictions, and more physical abuse on the body. Last global law is head control. And so that is how we know we've shifted the energy from column to column. You should be landing pretty tight, but the head should be moving side to side a slight bit. And when I say that, I don't mean the head moves away on its own. I mean the body shifts and the whole body lands in that other column with the head being over the foot. And that's when we know where our placement and our transfer of energy has been efficient. So the key points here are the 6 global laws. All set by good posture and alignment. If we can create good posture and alignment, active feet and decompression, then these patterns will show up. Then our body will memorize these patterns, and ultimately when we move, it will help our body and enhance our physiological network, as opposed to moving in bad patterns, which is going to be abusive to our physiological network. And that comes down to our lifestyle as well, and the way that we rest. So if we sit in chairs rigidly all the time with our femurs stuck externally rotated instead of supple positions, then it's going to contribute to our physiology in a good way or a bad way. And again, we want these things to show up subconsciously. We're not trying to force and run side to side, especially with the foot and ankle complex. You just want to build that up so it has the strength to perform properly. You do not want to try to stiffen the foot when you're running. And the recode like this takes time, just enhancing your posture. You can see people that are on their journey. That some people do it with yoga, some people do it with go-to drills, some people do it with strength training. But it takes time to really lengthen out your posture and create the proper activation and alignment within these areas. But all of that will contribute to a healthy locomotive engine, which we will install with the next lesson on the rerun, where we will eventually be looking to see nature's mathematics show up in the way that we move. Common cues here: straight feet, inside ankle bone high, active arch. That's the platform. One of the cues I like to use for that is the whole foot faces the ground, so that we don't excessively try to force that inside ankle bone up too much, where we're supinating and we're really favoring that outer edge. We just want activity on it. So you want the whole foot to face the ground. If you just pronate and you just use the inside edge, you imagine the outside edge peeling up. And if you just use the outside edge, you imagine the inside edge peeling up. You want that whole foot to face the ground. Large surface area. You want to move the whole body as one, so you're not isolating any of these principles, but using them together in synergy. Want to create more leverage, which is basically just going to be a lean down and more back chain dominance. We got our bows as our landing, down and out, corners, leaving, up and in. I call that the whip, right? Catch down, drive down and out, whip back up and in. Columns, head control, pack the shoulders, which means when we land on one side and that arm rocks back, that shoulder is actually going to pack down into the side a tiny bit. And that's because it's a coupled motion of the spine. As we land, the spine is doing the same thing that the rest of our body is doing, is absorbing energy into that side and trying to fling back to the other side. So we get extension and we get a side bend of the spine, which causes our shoulder to pack down a little bit. Common compromise here: inactive feet, a forward center of gravity, excessive tilt with an excessive rib flare, which is basically excessive spinal curvature. Weak ankles is a huge one. When people are running and their ankles are crashing, it's the foundation of running. We need to strengthen those ankles. People that are tight and they're not getting the energy exchange is the compromise here. Another reason people feel like they can't run and they're dysfunctional. There's no fluidity. And that's where we say a lot of meatheads or lifters don't take these movement patterns into consideration and end up tightening themselves up to the point where they're limited in the way that they move. And certain things are doing the jobs and compensating for other things because they're not getting that energy exchange and that energy transfer. And then a huge one here is lack of internal rotation, and the femurs are stuck externally rotated. Again, that comes with that flat foot and forward center of gravity, but just the way we sit, the way we stand in our lifestyle, people tend to get stuck slightly externally rotated, and reaccessing that internal rotation is going to be key for a healthy gait cycle. Primary benefits of the Recode: well, you feel great. You get enhanced foot function, ability to move and balance, posture and alignment, quality of connective tissue. All this will lead to an enhanced gait cycle, and you'll understand the direction and the map of where you should be in every movement. It also comes with increased muscle function and joint articulation, decreased pain, tightness, and restriction. A healthy burn. So the soreness with these exercises are typically minor, and you start to get everything working as one. You're not isolating, not doing a hamstring contraction or a quad extension, right? You're using everything together in a compound fashion, and it feels that way when you get this proper soreness, where everything's kind of active together. Understand nature's design for human movement, and you'll understand healthy resting positions, which is basically deep squat in multiple variations of the rocker, as well as standing in our columns.